The land was silent, the mountains standing like ancient sentinels over the village below. Eirik, once a proud warrior, now returned as a shadow of his former self. Exiled, betrayed by those he swore to protect, he had wandered the barren wilds, seeking redemption that seemed out of reach. His armor, tarnished with the weight of years, clung to him like a second skin. His heart was heavy, filled with the ghosts of lost comrades and forgotten promises. As he approached the village, the memories of his past echoed in his mind. Would they welcome him back, or would the curses of his past linger forever, preventing him from finding peace? The wind howled, carrying the scent of the sea as Eirik's fate awaited him, bound by his own guilt and the unforgiving land. As Eirik entered the village, a cold silence greeted him. No joyous shouts, no welcoming arms, only wary gazes. The homes he once knew now seemed foreign, haunted by the echoes of a life long lost. An old friend, a warrior named Haldor, stepped forward. His face was lined with age, but the fire of battle still burned in his eyes. Haldor spoke first, his voice thick with uncertainty. "Eirik, is it truly you?" The words hung in the air, heavy with both hope and suspicion. Eirik nodded, his voice low. "I've returned, to face what I have left behind." Haldor's eyes narrowed, searching Eirik's face for any sign of the man he once knew. It was clear that the years had not been kind to either of them. Haldor's voice broke the silence. "You don't know what you've come back to, Eirik. Things have changed. The village, the tribe, they're not the same. There's talk of a curse, a dark force that's spreading across the land." Eirik's eyes narrowed. He had heard the whispers during his travels, but he hadn't believed them. "A curse?" Eirik questioned. "What has happened here?" Haldor looked around, his voice lowering. "A power-hungry leader Jorund has risen. He seeks to control everything, even the spirits of the land. And it's all tied to the curse. Your return, it may be the only hope, or it may bring about the end." Eirik turned his gaze towards the village, a deep frown creasing his brow. The air was thick with the unspoken history between him and the land he had once sworn to protect. "I can't believe it's come to this," he muttered. Haldor, sensing the weight of his friend's turmoil, placed a hand on his shoulder. "None of us expected this, Eirik. We all have our demons to face." As Eirik's eyes scanned the village, a chilling thought crossed his mind. This is not just about the curse, is it? Jorund, he's using something far darker than power to control them. Haldor's silence was answer enough. The village may have changed, but Eirik's return had already set the stage for a confrontation neither of them were ready for. The silence between the two men deepened as they turned to walk toward the heart of the village. The first signs of the curse were subtle but unmistakable. The once thriving marketplace lay in ruins, abandoned carts and withered goods scattered across the ground. Eirik's eyes hardened with determination as he stepped forward. Whatever Jorund is doing, it ends now. Haldor glanced at him, his face weary. "You can't just fight your way through this, Eirik. This curse, it's tied to the very land itself." Eirik stopped in his tracks, his hands clenched into fists. "Then I will free it, no matter the cost." The two warriors, bound by a past of shared battles, now found themselves facing a new enemy, one that could not be struck down with a sword. As Eirik and Haldor ventured deeper into the village, they were met with whispers and fearful glances from the few villagers brave enough to be outside. The curse was not just a tale, it was real. Haldor's face tightened with worry. "Eirik, you need to understand. Jorund, he doesn't just seek power. He wants to control the spirits of our ancestors." Eirik stopped in his tracks, turning to his old friend with a stern expression. "Control the spirits?" he repeated. "How?" Haldor hesitated before answering, his voice barely a whisper. "He's using an ancient artifact, a relic that binds the dead to his will. He thinks he can control everything. But the curse, it grows stronger with every soul he traps." The wind howled, carrying with it the heavy weight of their fate. The two warriors walked towards the outskirts of the village, where the ancient temple stood. The air grew colder as they neared it, and Eirik could feel an unsettling energy pulse from within. "This is where Jorund holds the artifact," Haldor said, his voice grave. "It was here that our ancestors sealed the spirits away to protect them from the greed of men." Eirik frowned, his grip tightening on his sword. "And now he plans to break that seal." Haldor nodded, his eyes downcast. "The relic is powerful, Eirik, but it will consume him, just as it will consume all of us if we don't stop him." The temple loomed ahead, its dark stone walls covered in ancient runes. They both knew what had to be done, but the cost of success weighed heavily on them both. Inside the temple, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of incense lingered. Eirik and Haldor stepped carefully, their footsteps echoing in the silence. "The artifact is here, hidden deep within," Haldor murmured, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. Eirik glanced at the ancient stone altar in the center. "How do we destroy it?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "We don't," Haldor replied, his gaze hardening. "To destroy it would only unleash the spirits. We must take it and bind it once more, or risk everything." Eirik nodded, understanding the gravity of the task ahead. But deep down he felt a growing fear. What if Jorund had already found a way to control it? Suddenly a low, sinister hum filled the air. Eirik turned swiftly, his sword drawn as dark shadows moved in the corners of the temple. Haldor stepped forward, his voice strained with fear. "It's already begun. The spirits are awakening." Eirik's heart raced as he gripped his sword tighter. "We need to move now." The shadows stretched, forming eerie shapes that seemed to reach for them, the air growing colder with each passing second. Eirik swung his sword, cutting through the darkness. "We must hurry before Jorund can summon them all." Haldor nodded grimly, his face pale as he followed closely behind. The temple had become a battleground, and the spirits were not the only enemies they faced. The two warriors fought through the temple's haunted halls, but it was clear that the spirits were growing stronger with each passing moment. "We can't keep this up forever," Eirik shouted over the roar of the spirits. Haldor's face was streaked with sweat as he parried a shadowy figure's attack. "There's only one way to stop this. We must destroy the artifact, before Jorund completes his ritual." Eirik looked towards the altar, now pulsing with dark energy. "Then we finish it together." With a fierce battle cry, the two rushed forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The spirits howled, but Eirik's resolve burned brighter than ever. He would not let the curse consume them all. Eirik and Haldor stood side by side, surveying the battlefield ahead. The air was thick with tension, the distant rumble of thunder echoing through the mountains. "This is no ordinary fight," Haldor murmured. "Jorund has summoned forces beyond our comprehension." Eirik's eyes narrowed as he gripped his sword tightly. "Then we must be ready," he said, his voice steady, betraying no hint of fear. The enemy approached, an army of men, but also dark spirits, floating eerily above the ground. "We face the curse itself, not just men. This battle will decide everything." Haldor met his gaze, his face grim but resolute. "It's now or never, Eirik. We can't back down." As the enemy drew closer, Eirik felt his resolve harden. The spirits surrounding Jorund's army whispered ominously, urging him to retreat. But Eirik stood firm, his voice cutting through the cold air. "We fight for the future of this land. We fight for our people." Haldor nodded, his face set in a stern expression. "It's not just for the people, Eirik. It's for everything we've ever believed in. If we lose this battle, everything is lost." The sound of marching feet grew louder. Eirik turned toward Haldor, his eyes filled with determination. "Then we fight, not for victory, but for our souls." With that, they both advanced toward the battle, knowing that their fates were now sealed. The clash of metal and the shrieks of spirits filled the air as Eirik and Haldor plunged into the heart of the battle. Eirik fought with precision, his sword slicing through the darkened forms of enemies. Haldor beside him chanted words of power, his staff glowing with magical energy. "We must reach Jorund," Eirik shouted over the chaos. "Once we stop him, the rest will fall." Haldor, swinging his staff to deflect a blow, nodded. But we can't face him alone. We need the others. Eirik gritted his teeth. Then we fight until we have no strength left. The battle raged on, each step forward more difficult than the last. But neither man would yield. Eirik's breath came in ragged gasps as he fought his way through the army. His body ached from the strain, but the enemy seemed endless. "We need to find Jorund," Haldor shouted, his voice barely audible over the clash of metal. Eirik nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "There," he pointed. In the distance, Jorund stood, surrounded by an aura of dark energy. "He's protected by the spirits," Haldor warned. "We can't get to him without facing them first." Eirik's gaze hardened. "Then we fight the spirits." With a battle cry he surged forward, Haldor at his side. Their path was clear. Either they would fall, or they would stop Jorund and the curse he had unleashed. Eirik and Haldor reached the center of the battlefield, where Jorund stood at the altar of the cursed temple. The air was thick with dark magic, and the spirits that swirled around them seemed to grow stronger. "Jorund!" Eirik shouted. "This ends now." Jorund turned slowly, his face twisted in a cruel smile. "You think you can stop me?" he taunted. "You have no idea what you're facing." Eirik's sword crackled with energy as he stepped forward. "I don't need to know everything to end this." With a final shout, Eirik and Haldor charged at Jorund, ready to face the final battle. Their destiny was sealed. The battle had taken its toll on both sides. As the last of the shadowy figures fell, Eirik stood over the smoldering ruins of the cursed altar. His sword was covered in blood, but his eyes were fixed on Jorund, who had fallen to his knees, defeated but not broken. "This is it, Jorund," Eirik said, his voice grim. "The curse ends here." Jorund laughed weakly, blood dripping from his mouth. "You think you've won, Eirik?" he rasped. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." Eirik's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Jorund's eyes glinted with malevolent satisfaction. "The curse is not what you think. It was never just a spell. It was a prison, and you've just opened the gates." Jorund's laughter echoed in the hollow air as Eirik stood frozen, the weight of his words settling heavily in his chest. "The prison, the spirits," Eirik muttered, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. Haldor, who had arrived just in time to witness the confrontation, stepped forward, his face pale. "He's right," Haldor said, his voice strained. "The curse was never a simple spell. It was designed to keep something far worse contained." Eirik looked at him, confused. What could be worse than this? Haldor glanced nervously at Jorund. "The spirits you've been fighting. They're not the curse. They're the guardians, and now they're free." Eirik turned sharply toward the altar, his mind racing. "What have we done?" he muttered to himself. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air grew colder. The spirits, now freed, began to manifest, their forms becoming more solid. Haldor stepped back, his face filled with dread. "The prison has broken. The spirits are free, and with them, something much darker." Eirik's eyes darted toward the now crumbling altar. "We have to stop them," he said, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. "No," Haldor replied. "You can't. The only way to stop them now is to return the artifact." Eirik looked at him, his eyes filled with determination. "Then we'll return it together." The spirits grew more numerous, their forms now fully visible, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Eirik's grip on his sword tightened as he faced the first of the apparitions. "We must fight them back," he said through gritted teeth. Haldor's voice was calm, but firm. "We can't fight them, not directly. They are bound to the artifact. We need to return it, or they'll tear this world apart." Eirik glanced at the altar again. "Then let's make sure they don't get any further." With that, he charged forward, his sword raised high. The spirits hissed, recoiling at his approach. It was clear there would be no easy victory. As the battle raged on, Eirik and Haldor found themselves cornered, surrounded by the spirits. The artifact lay in ruins before them, its power still pulsing through the air. "We need to make one last push," Eirik said, panting from exhaustion. Haldor nodded, his face grim. "If we don't, the spirits will tear this place apart, and the curse will spread beyond the temple. It will consume everything." Eirik took a deep breath, the weight of their task heavy on his shoulders. "Then we finish it, no more running." Together, they stepped toward the altar, determined to put an end to the chaos they had unwittingly unleashed. The final battle had begun. Eirik, his armor battered and bloodied, stood at the forefront, his sword raised high, eyes locked on Jorund, who stood atop the temple's steps, a twisted smile playing across his lips. "You think you can stop me?" Jorund's voice echoed through the temple ruins. Eirik stepped forward, his voice filled with unwavering determination. "This ends now, Jorund. You and your curse will no longer control these lands." The air was thick with dark magic, swirling around them, as the remnants of the spirits seemed to gather, awaiting their master's command. With a swift motion, Eirik charged, his every step leading him closer to the end of this long, tormenting journey. As Eirik approached, the spirits that had once been his allies now turned against him. They circled him like vultures, their forms flickering in and out of reality. "You will fail," one of the spirits hissed. Eirik's resolve only strengthened. "No, I will succeed," he muttered under his breath. With every swing of his sword, he cut through the spirits that blocked his path, their ethereal forms dissipating into smoke. Behind him, Haldor chanted ancient words, his staff glowing brighter as he attempted to weaken Jorund's hold over the spirits. "We fight not just for victory, but for the freedom of all souls," Haldor shouted, his voice filled with power. The battle had reached its peak, but the end was still unclear. Jorund, now surrounded by a powerful aura of dark magic, laughed maniacally as he extended his hands toward Eirik. "You cannot defeat me, Eirik. You are nothing but a relic of the past." Eirik's grip on his sword tightened. "I am everything this land stands for." With a roar, Eirik launched himself toward Jorund, the ground shaking beneath his feet as their forces collided. The two warriors clashed with incredible force, their swords meeting with a resounding crash. Haldor, seeing the battle escalate, reached into his robes and pulled out a small, glowing gem, an ancient artifact that could tip the scales. "We need to end this now," he muttered, ready to use it. The struggle between Eirik and Jorund continued, neither yielding to the other's force. Sweat poured down Eirik's face as he pressed forward, his sword now a blur of motion. "You're stronger than I anticipated," Jorund sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Eirik gritted his teeth. "It's not strength that matters, Jorund. It's purpose." With one final push, Eirik broke through Jorund's defense, knocking his sword from his hand. But as Jorund stumbled back, he raised his arms, calling upon the last of his dark power. "This will be your end," Jorund spat, unleashing a blast of energy. Eirik dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, and rolled to his feet, ready for the final blow. With the final surge of strength, Eirik lunged forward, his sword piercing Jorund's chest. Jorund's eyes widened in shock as the dark magic surrounding him began to fade. "It's over," Eirik whispered, his voice filled with both relief and sorrow. Jorund collapsed to his knees, his grip loosening on the dark artifact he had held so tightly. The spirits once bound to him now began to dissipate, their forms fading into the ether. Eirik stood over Jorund, sword in hand, knowing that the curse had finally been broken. But the cost of victory weighed heavily on him. The battle was over, but the scars would remain. The aftermath of the battle left the land quiet, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Eirik stood at the center of the battlefield, his sword now sheathed, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The temple, once filled with dark magic, was now in ruins. The spirits had dissipated, leaving only the echoes of their curses. Haldor approached, his face weary, but with a hint of hope. "It's over," he said quietly. Eirik nodded, but his eyes were distant, still haunted by the destruction they had wrought. "The curse is broken, but at what cost?" he murmured, his voice filled with regret. Haldor placed a hand on his shoulder. We fought to free the land, Eirik. The sacrifices were not in vain. The villagers, who had remained hidden during the battle, now slowly emerged from their homes. Some were wary, others filled with awe at the destruction that had unfolded around them. A young woman approached Eirik, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. "You've saved us," she said softly, her voice trembling. Eirik looked down at her, his heart heavy. "I've only done what needed to be done," he replied, his voice flat. The weight of their words lingered in the air as the villagers gathered around, hesitant but grateful. Eirik knew that the real struggle was not over. It was only just beginning. They would rebuild, but the scars of the curse would remain forever etched in their hearts. Eirik spent the next few days helping the villagers rebuild, but his mind was never far from the battle. The spirits may have been banished, but the darkness they had left behind lingered in his heart. Haldor noticed the change in his friend. "You did what was necessary, Eirik," he said, his voice calm but filled with understanding. Eirik looked at him, his expression clouded with doubt. "Did we really save them, Haldor? Or did we just delay the inevitable?" Haldor sighed deeply. "We cannot change the past. All we can do is guide the future." Eirik turned away, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The road ahead was unclear, but he knew one thing: he would not walk it alone. The weeks passed and life began to return to the village. Eirik found himself slowly healing, though the weight of his past mistakes still haunted him. One evening, as he sat by the village fire, the young woman who had spoken to him earlier approached again. She smiled gently. "You saved us," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The people are starting to believe again. They say you are their hope." Eirik looked up at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'm no hero," he said quietly. "I just did what had to be done." She knelt beside him, her eyes meeting his. "You are a hero to us, Eirik. Don't doubt that." Eirik felt something stir within him, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. As the days passed, Eirik knew that his journey was not yet over. Though the village had been saved, the scars of the curse remained in his heart. Haldor found him one morning, standing by the same hill where they had once talked. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Haldor asked, his voice laced with sadness. Eirik nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I can't stay here, Haldor. I've made too many mistakes." Haldor's eyes softened. "There's no shame in redemption, Eirik. You've done what few could ever do." Eirik smiled faintly, the weight of his past still pressing on him, but with a sense of resolution. "I'll find my own path," he said quietly. "But I'll always carry this place with me." With that he turned and walked away, ready to face whatever future awaited him. As Eirik walked into the village one final time, he was met with a silence that felt more profound than ever. The ruins of the cursed temple still loomed in the distance, but the land was beginning to heal. The villagers were rebuilding, and life was slowly returning to the place that had once been haunted by darkness. Eirik's heart felt a mix of peace and sorrow. He had done what he could, but the journey had cost him more than he could have imagined. Haldor stood by the village entrance, watching him approach. "You've done what few could ever do," Haldor said. Eirik nodded, his expression solemn. "I had no choice," he replied. "But I found something I didn't expect." With that, he turned away, ready to leave the past behind. The path ahead was uncertain. Eirik knew his journey was not yet finished, but the road was no longer one of rage or regret. He had been exiled, betrayed, and lost so much, yet in the quiet of this village, he felt the possibility of redemption. The villagers were grateful, but they had also moved on, and so must he. The young woman who had spoken to him before approached once more, her face filled with hope. "You've changed everything for us, Eirik," she said, her voice steady. He smiled faintly, his eyes filled with the weight of his past. "Maybe," he replied, "but I'm not the hero you think I am." Her gaze softened. "Maybe not, but you were the one who saved us." Eirik looked away, his heart heavy, but for the first time in years, he felt something akin to peace. As Eirik turned to leave, he felt the weight of the past slipping from his shoulders, though the scars remained. The road ahead stretched far, but this time it was a journey of his own making. He had no destination in mind, only the knowledge that his path was no longer defined by guilt or vengeance. Haldor caught up with him, his steps slow but purposeful. "Where will you go now?" he asked. Eirik looked out at the open road, the horizon bathed in the soft light of evening. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I'll find my own way. No more running." Haldor nodded, understanding. "You've found the strength to move forward. That's enough." With one final look back at the village, Eirik turned away, stepping into the unknown, the journey to his future just beginning. The wind howled through the trees as Eirik walked, his footsteps steady and sure. His mind was no longer clouded with doubt or regret. He had faced the darkness, and now it was time to embrace the light, whatever form that might take. The village and the people he had saved were behind him, but they had become part of his journey. He had found something more than redemption. He had found the courage to face himself. The road was long, but he knew that every step would bring him closer to who he was meant to be. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, he smiled to himself. The past was behind him, but the future was his to shape. As Eirik walked away from the village, he knew that this was not an end but a beginning. He had been tested, broken, and rebuilt, and now he was free. The curse had been lifted, and so had the weight on his heart. For the first time in years, he felt the freedom to breathe, to live. The shadows of the past still lingered, but they no longer defined him. He had faced his demons and emerged stronger. As the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Eirik knew that his journey was far from over. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he was ready to embrace it, whatever it might bring.